Oh boy. So just this week alone, I did two separate interviews of two different doctors who both went on rants about how bad statins were. We talked a lot about this last week, but Dr. Kate Shanahan and Dr. Steve Hewitt were just like, these do nothing, these help nobody, and the side effects are terrible. And they just went on like literally just don't take them, get off of them, whatever you can do. I had somebody in the neighborhood reach out who actually watched the video from last week. He wasn't able to come in person, but he watched this. He reached out to me and he said he's in his 40s and his doctor wants him on a statin. So he's been taking it and he knows something's off, but he can't put his finger on it. And it's his cognition. He's forgetting things and he's getting brain fog. I watched a video that was recommended by one of these doctors I interviewed, Dr. Kate Shanahan, that was statins made me stupid. And you see this guy, and he's talking about how his cholesterol was a little high for his doctor's liking, so they put him on a statin. Um, and he took it, and his cholesterol was lower, but he started to notice that his thinking was worse. Um, couldn't remember things. He would think oh, I need to go grab this in the other room, and he'd go to the other room and couldn't remember why he was there. And he was playing a game with his family. He used to always play a game with his family, Master something. You remember? You have to kind of memorize a sequence of things. I can't remember the name of it exactly. I remember I played it as a kid, and he couldn't play it very well anymore, because he couldn't remember things nearly as much. This guy was like, and he even recognized I want to take this because my doctor said I should, and I'm worried about my cholesterol. So now I reduced the dose, but now I'm wondering if on such a low dose of the statin if it's even doing anything, and I'm yeah, and I'm wondering whether the side effects are worth it for whatever this is supposed to help me with. I don't know. So why am I taking it? He's like, maybe this does extend my life, but if my life is like this, I don't want to be like this. I'd rather have a heart attack. It's crazy. Okay, book giveaway time. Books that you already might have. So, lad, really hoping that you win this. Um, but it's based on a trivia. If you get this and you don't like the book, make sure you give it to somebody, give it away or whatever. But I'm going to make this based on a quiz. So this quiz is from the American Diabetes Association, our favorites. We love them. They have a recommendation for different amounts of things that you should be eating. They call it their plate, basically. So the three categories that they recommend that people eat are non-starchy vegetables, carbohydrate foods, and lean protein. So those three things make up 100% of this plate. They also recommend, I think it was 4 ounces of water with a meal. What percentages of each do you think are on that plate? So if you had to think about it, divide it up. You can, if you need a pen, whatever, you can just write this somewhere on the piece of paper. What percentage of, if you guys want a pen, non-starchy vegetables, lean protein, and carbohydrate foods. If you get it right, you will get this beautiful cookbook by a woman I just got to meet in person about 2 months ago, Maria Emmerich, who makes really delicious foods. Oh my goodness, look at that herb roasted chicken. That looks delicious. Percentage of each. What do you think is the recommended? Yep. What percentage of each do you think the American Diabetes Association recommends for people with diabetes as far as the percentages of non-starchy vegetables, carbohydrate foods, and lean proteins? Okay. Who wants to guess first?
50% vegetable, 25% cow, 20% protein, balance carbohydrates.
Okay.
Because I'm thinking the carbohydrates is the highest amount,
Okay.
and then the vegetables, and the smallest one is meat.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I read this somewhere. and the numbers that coming back to me is like 17% for the meat and 23% for the vegetable carbohydrate and balance.
Okay. Good guesses, all of you. The winner.
Dang.
50%.
One on each floor.
Good job. So this is yours. Congratulations. You can do whatever you like with it if you already have it. There you go. There you go. 50. What they recommend is 50% non-starchy vegetables, 25%. So you were right the first time, and then you second guessed it. 25% carbohydrate foods, 70 or 25% lean protein. So all of you were very close. But what that ends up being is that for somebody with type 2 diabetes, they're eating a plate that's 75% carbohydrate, 25% lean protein with almost no fat. So that's the recommendation. Now, with non-starchy vegetables, obviously, there's not a lot of calories. It is carbohydrates, but there's lots of fiber, so you don't absorb very much. So that isn't really the problem. But the video that they made a few months ago with the woman who I sent you, the woman who is in charge of the nutrition, said all you have to do is just, when you're making a meal, this is a split, so 50% is the vegetables, 25%. Her direct quote was like, of whatever carbohydrate foods you like, pasta or rice or bread or potato, that goes here. And then the last is lean protein. And it got so much attention on Twitter. I was so proud that so many people stood up and said, this is utter nonsense. You guys are a terrorist organization.
Well,
this
that's
is
better than
ridiculous.
I thought, though, because I was thinking, well, they were still hitched on the potatoes.
Yeah.
Hence
Yeah.
my answer.
Yep.
Because I was like going, wait, they don't, none of them seem to be up to speed on this. So
Yep.
it's like, but at least they're telling people to get the fiber stuff.
That's a help. Yeah, that's definitely a help. We'll talk today about some of these ideas and where they came from and whatever. But yeah, a lot of people spoke out that this is just absolutely ridiculous. So yes, at the very least, they are recommending some vegetables, which is certainly better than just crackers and cookies or whatever. But yeah, pretty bad. So anyway,
Is Nielsen's
it is. It's Nielsen's frozen custard, a vegetable. I believe it has a very high fiber, lots of protein, low carb, not addictive at all. Yeah, yep. You can continue going there twice a day, and you'll be fine.
Natural,
All natural, organic. Yep, exactly.
Whatever you want it to be.
Exactly. On today's topic, we are going to be talking about insulin and insulin resistance. The title of the lesson is Insulin and Insulin Resistance, How to Trap Your Fat Stores. Obviously, most of us do not want to trap our fat stores, but we'll teach you, if you do want to do that, how you can do that quite effectively. Again, that's what most people are trying the opposite to do, but we'll talk about some of those mechanisms. Today, cannot recommend this dude enough. I'm pretty sure all of you guys are familiar with Dr. Ben Bickman. He wrote the amazing book, Why We Get Sick, which is all about insulin resistance, how it starts, what it causes, all the different diseases that stem from insulin resistance, and what to do about it. He's got a new book coming out as well that is the kind of counter to this, which is basically like Why We Get Sick. I think it's called like How to Get Better or something. So it's more along the lines of the things you can do to fix or reverse insulin issues if you have them. I want to see. There's the illustration I'm looking for. I can't find it. And that is, okay, we won't worry about it. But if you want more information about this, there's a reason why his was the very first resource that I put on the back. This book is, again, it's marvelous, wonderful, so can't recommend it enough. To learn about insulin, we need to learn about calories. We've already done an entire lesson about calories, but we're just going to do a brief review of that. Then we're going to get into this hormone called insulin, what it does, what it doesn't do, and all of that stuff. So, as we talked about in one of the very first episodes that we did, we talked about the calories in, calories out theory of weight gain, weight loss in particular. Does anybody remember what that kind of theory says about how to lose weight? Calories in, calories out.
Just cut your calories.
Cut your calories.
More exercise.
More exercise. Yep, exactly. So the balance, and the reason why I put a scale there, there's calories in, which is the calories that you ingest in your food and your beverages, and then there's also what you expend or what you burn. The assumption is, as long as those two things are equal, that you will be in a stable weight. If you are moving more and eating less, you're going to be losing weight, and vice versa. If you're eating more and moving less, you'll be able to gain weight. You'll be in a weight gain situation. It's a very simplistic way of looking at things, and we're going to be talking about how energy works in the body today as well. And you do need more energy to then gain fat, but there's other things involved with it. Remember that the problem with calories in, calories out is that you're not a fixed machine or a simple machine. So, for example, we kind of gave this example of like a toaster. If you put different kinds of bread in a toaster and push the toaster doesn't change based on the kind of bread that you put in there, unless you change something on the programming. The toaster just knows to make toast, and the input always, whatever the input is, the output is going to be the same. It's going to toast your bread to a certain degree. The human body changes based on what you feed it. So if you give something less calories and you make that thing move more over time, that body is going to adjust to bring it back into balance. So what kinds of things might happen to a body that is being underfed and overworked? What changes might we expect?
The body might stop moving.
There you go. That's a great point. Yeah.
Tired,
Yeah. Perfectly said.
And that's where I want the nap.
Yep.
Instead of moving.
Yeah, there you go. That's a huge one. Spontaneous movement. As I'm looking around, all of you are kind of like moving just a little bit. I do it all the time. That is a body that is using energy and using calories. If you've got good energy, you might be, maybe a little fidgety, or if you're, sitting, you might want to kind of move around, where the opposite happens in that state. Why would the body want to continually waste energy if it's not getting enough and already using too much? The body's going to slow itself down. It's going to make you fatigued so that you're not using as much energy. What about your hunger?
Well, days after the initial malaise,
After you've been like on a diet, I mean, like if you've been restricting your calories for a while and you've been over exercising, what happens to your hunger and or cravings?
I would think you'd want more food because your body's saying I need more.
Yep, exactly right. You would want more food. You would be more hungry, have more cravings. The body would ramp up its reward for you finding the calories that it's not finding that it really wants and needs. And so, yes, we notice that cravings go up, hunger goes up. And this is why anybody who does a normal standard diet ends up losing and losing and losing. And then all of a sudden they can't lose anymore, even if they're doing the same thing. Their body's cold and tired and lethargic, like you mentioned. And they're also experiencing lots of hunger, lots of cravings. So it's much easier to give in. We think of it as a willpower problem, and we blame these people for being lazy. But really, what the body is signaling is extremely powerful, and you're just not going to be able to overcome it over time. So that's a standard kind of theory about weight balance. The other kind of theory that we want to talk about is also what your hormones are telling you. So hormones are things in the body that signal your body to do things. Okay, so there's a reason why, for example, you get tired at night, and there's a reason why you feel awake in the morning. Who can tell me why that is?
It's telling you when it's time to wake up and go to sleep.
Very good.
I have this problem late at night when I'm tired and I'm falling asleep, but I'm so used to staying up so late that my brain is kind of saying, hey, go to sleep, but then it's going, go eat something.
Yeah.
And so it goes and eats the junky food.
Yep.
And then eventually I'm not sleepy anymore.
Yep.
And then I stay up an extra 2 more hours.
Yep. Vicious cycle. Yeah, exactly. So what you're describing is you wake up, you have hormones that say, okay, it's time to be awake. This is a hormone, most famously cortisol. Cortisol we call the stress hormone. And we think of it as a bad thing. No hormones are bad. Even insulin, which we're going to talk about a lot today, no hormones are bad. They just should be high and or low at certain times. So cortisol should be high in the morning. Cortisol makes you alert, makes you awake, it makes you scan your environment and seek light to make sure everything's safe and good. It can help you go hunt or find plants to eat, whatever you can find on the horizon. And then you want that high in the middle of the day. Now, you don't want that high later in the day. So later in the day, now it's time for everything to chill out. The sun sets, and so you're no longer getting big bright light that we're getting now. Everything's more muted. We evolved with a fire. Even the direction of the fire was low to the ground, and it was a warm kind of a light. And so that is all in support of your cortisol dropping. The stress hormone drops, and the opposite kind of hormone to cortisol, one of them is called melatonin. Melatonin is now your drowsy, make you sleepy, helps you get really good sleep hormone. That you now want to come up. And those two things kind of balance. So an example of that working really, really well would be you get up at the sunrise, you get outside as early as possible, get as much of the sunlight as you can while it's big, bright light, big blue sky, bright light, bright sun. Try to get it into your eyes, try to get it without the filter of glass where possible, and you get as much of it as you can, and that is essentially swinging a pendulum really hard one way in one direction. Then, as the day is going, the sun is setting, everything's getting dark. In a world where we don't have screens or electricity, which is all very, very recent, last 150 years, now everything's calming down. Maybe there's a fire, but that's a really low red light on the horizon. Now you get drowsy and sleepy, and okay, we want the stress hormone to be very low. This is the time when I listen to my sleep stories on my Calm app, and I have Matthew McConaughey tell a relaxing story in his wonderful accent. Or I listen to Bob Ross, one of the better ones, Bob Ross, talking about his painting and the happy little trees. And so the sleep story is called The Happy Little Z's. And I never know how they end because I'm always just out at the end of it. That's an ideal world because the pendulum swinging so far one way from having some hormones to swinging the other way to having great sleep, those work together. Problem today is we don't get outside. We leave the house, we get in our cars, we drive to work, we sit in an office, may or may not have natural light coming in. Most people, depending on whether they're working from home or in an office, don't get a lot of opportunity, don't create a lot of opportunity to get outside, and they're staring at screens. Now, screens have blue light, but it's really kind of low compared to the light that you can get outside. The cloudiest day is magnitudes times more bright than like a really light environment indoors. You get so much more light energy just from being outside. So you're not getting the light energy during the day, but then you go home, the sun's already set. What do we all do? Of course, we turn on Netflix and we watch Schitt's Creek and we watch Drive to Survive and we watch all these wonderful, amazing shows on a screen that emits blue light. So we are just getting this constant low bombardment of this light for so long, but it's never enough when we need it, and it's way too much at night when we don't need it. So cortisol remains kind of low level, kind of like higher than it should be. Cortisol is telling you there's some low level of stress. It's going to make you feel like you want to eat. And when you want to eat, when cortisol's high, you don't crave a steak. You want the junky, crappy, sugary, give you that quick hit. Cortisol, being the stress hormone, would be the hormone that would elevate really high if we saw a bear walking around the corner. If we saw a bear walking around the corner, which response would we rather have? Would we rather have a high stress, holy crap, that's a bear, let's get the hell out of here, or at least try to outrun Lad or any of the other guys to get eaten? Or would you rather have a really muted, relaxed, chilled response? Like, hey, check out that bear.
That's cute.
Oh, what a cute, come here, bear. Aww. You want the stress response. You want to be able to run away as fast as possible, or at least outrun everybody else. That's what we need, and we needed that. But the problem is, and again, today's environment is we've got so much of the low-level stress, we don't get the polarity in our hormones that we need to have a healthy function. And so then our sleep sucks, then we're eating too late, that messes up other hormones, then we don't sleep as much, then we're drowsy during the day, and it just continues on this vicious cycle. The best thing your body's going to want in that state is quick energy, carbohydrate food, as quickly as possible to help give you the energy, and now we're on a blood sugar up and down. So again, all of that to say hormones are very important. They fluctuate. We need them all. Nor hormone is good, nor hormone is bad. It's just the timing of it. We need that to work properly for us to feel at our best. So hormones are very powerful signals. Some of them tell you you have just eaten and you are full and you can stop. That's called leptin. Um, some hormones are the ones that tell you, wow, I'm really hungry and it's time to eat. So that would be like ghrelin is the name of that hormone. Those two can kind of balance each other out. Um, People with a misregulation of leptin never feel full. I remember there was a kid I was growing up with in elementary school, and it was incredibly rare, this disorder where he didn't have leptin. We didn't even know what leptin was when I was in elementary school. We just knew that he would never be able to feel full, and so he would just keep eating and keep eating and keep eating. And there weren't many obese kids when I was in fifth grade, but he was pretty big at that time because he just could never feel full. Terrible. So I don't know where he is today, but yeah, really awful disease. Um, so these hormones, again, are very powerful. Some tell you, again, like insulin would be the hormone that tells your body to take in energy. Opposite of that would be glucagon, which tells your body to release energy. So on that note, this is a good introduction going from why hormones are so powerful to the hormone insulin and why that's going to be our primary topic today. So who can tell me about insulin, what it does, what its role is in the body? Anything that you've heard, who uses it, what it's for, um, any ideas?
Much better than I used to.
Cool.
Its role is to tell the sugar and stuff where to go.
There you go. Great.
And I used to think its role was to reduce that and control it, but now
Yeah, you sent me a really good analogy too, by the way, which if you're comfortable with, you could even read what you sent me. I thought the analogy was like really, really good. Um, but yeah, that's exactly right. So just as a starting point, insulin is a hormone that tells your body to store energy. When insulin is high, your body's in storage mode. When insulin is low, you're in burning mode. You get things out. You don't get things out when the hormone is high. So as you're pulling that up, lad, the picture that I attached here shows insulin as a key. Blood sugar is on this outside, and then you have a cell with a lock on it. So basically, the insulin only gets in, the blood sugar, only enters the cell if insulin is present to tell it to go into the cell. Ben Bickman gave a wonderful example of this in one of my episodes that I did with him, where he talked about how in his lab, literally just across the hallway from where we were talking, he said he has cultures of cells that are swimming in energy. So like you have human cells, they are full of sugar all around it. Some have fat all around it, and he's got fat cells, and they're all sitting there. And you could bathe fat cells in sugar, and the fat cells never get bigger. They don't get bigger. They stay exactly the same. They're perfectly healthy. They remain small. Sugar everywhere, all the way around, surrounding. If there's no insulin present, sugar doesn't get in.
the hose is gone.
It literally, the cell doesn't care. It doesn't care what's going on outside. Doesn't matter. There could be all the energy the cell would ever want, but if there's no insulin, there's no signal to be open to stuff it in. As soon as you introduce insulin, those fat cells expand and get bigger and start taking up the energy because that's what insulin does. So again, I say that just to say that we're talking about calories in, calories out, and having an abundance of energy, meaning somebody who's eating too much. Yes, that can be a problem, but literally cannot be weight gain if it's also absent of insulin. You need both. You need extra energy and you need insulin. That's how important and powerful it is. So if we're talking about somebody who is in a good balance as far as their insulin goes and how they are, actually, lad, do you have that pulled up? This would be a good time to give your analogy of insulin and insulin resistance.
The last thing I wrote was just to get how insulin was overexposing us because it was thrown off by how we pump more of it in our system. Diabetes, the body develops resistance don't need a bigger hose. I need less sugar. Imagine getting a bigger hose to pump more water in a pool that's already full. Oh my God, no wonder my mother suffered so much pride in discovering a low-carb paradigm, and medicine doesn't ultimately serve us in the long run any more than one can be on chemo forever.
Yep.
Yet ignoring the body's natural mechanisms, we say, screw you, we'll just load up more.
Yep.
Hello, the body always becomes inflamed when we do too much of anything. That
Excellent.
doesn't make sense to me, and now I realize that that's because it doesn't.
Cool.
Yet insulin has saved people's lives in the short term, but not in the long term.
Yep. Excellent.
It breaks my heart that we are perhaps irreparably challenged by our cleverness. I'll be curious to see how Benedict goes with his book, since he's running against the Red Punch Hot Chocolate crowd. And but I also said, but on the other hand, I'm not sure I want to live in devoid of beer and wine and other treats. There's a reason why these things are so appealing, right?
Yep. That's perfect. Thanks, lad.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. So let's talk about somebody who is in a healthy metabolic state and how insulin works. So this would be a good time just to flip over to the back to see these different curves. These curves on the back here show the response of insulin to different foods, and they are macronutrients. This is grossly oversimplified, but just to give you the idea of when you're consuming carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So somebody who is metabolically healthy in an environment that we have evolved with, remembering that like if our evolution has been a week, we really drastically changed our diets in like the last 10 seconds or 30 seconds, very, very, very recently. In a normal state, we would be living in a world where fats and proteins would be predominantly the food that we could acquire. This is, again, just if we look around, we see all the plants everywhere. Carbohydrates are food that comes from plants. There's just not very many available all the time. Last week, one of my clients had a cherry tree. The cherry tree was in blossom. I had some cherries. They were really tasty. They were really good. Although it was really funny, since I hardly ever eat carbohydrate foods, I ate them, and she was like, "How could you eat that?" I'm like, "What are you talking about? Like, these are really good." And she was like, "Those are so tart." I said, "This is tart, really?" They were really sweet to me, and because I've had them not on my diet. So anyway, I know of that cherry tree. I don't know of any others. Other fruits like apples are not ready. Peaches are not ready. Apricots may be coming on. Wade is starting to come on.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would be a food source. Wade is our resident watermelon expert. Exactly.
They chuck that in.
Yeah, right. So now, of course, we can truck in watermelons, but that wasn't a thing, more than 100 years ago.
You'd have to wait a few weeks.
I mean, if you can buy a watermelon in a store 365 days out of the year, it's coming from someplace.
Yeah.
So yeah, Green River, we know, is amazing for melons. The melons might be hitting there now, but again, I'm either going to be willing to walk to Green River 200 miles and walk back to get some watermelon, or watermelon's not on my menu around here. It's not available. Yet just as easily, I could walk over to that lake in maybe 30 minutes or an hour. I could devise some type of a net or go fish or whatever, and I could catch all the fish I would need in a day with very little effort.
Go after that goose.
I'd go after the mean goose by the lake. It would be very easy to go grab a goose. It would be very easy to grab any of the way overpopulated ducks. That would be food for a day, or get their eggs or whatever. It would just be far easier for me to access proteins and fats than it would carbohydrates. When I do access carbohydrates, this is a very special, magical time of the year that they're available. This is like a treat, and this is why it tastes good to everybody. Every kid, every adult loves sweet. We love sweet. It's delicious. Apples are great. Peaches are great. Apricots are great. That is evolution rewarding you for finding sweet foods. Awesome. Get as many as you can now, like berries. If you stumbled upon a honey patch, you might suffer a few stings to be able to grab some honey. It's a quick source of energy. Carbohydrate foods, again, in a normal world are exceedingly, exceedingly rare. And so the sweet taste drives you to find them. And when you get them, you want to attack them as much as possible, because you're not going to get them all year round. So that is the reward system of why sweet things taste so good. Another analogy I'll say is that around here in my neighborhood, people do lots of gardens and they plant lots of tomatoes. Utah, I'll fight anybody on this. Utah tomatoes are the best on the planet. They're so freaking good. Love them. Absolutely delicious. Now, inevitably, in these neighborhoods, people will start gardens when it's nice and in the springtime after Mother's Day. We all know the old wives' tale around here. They'll start a garden, but in the middle of July, like now, it's 100 degrees. It's a lot of work to garden. You're not getting anything out of the garden for all the work and watering and weeding you put in. You've got nothing at this point. So people abandon their tomato plants. I know, it sucks. I see these things and they fall off and start rotting. And so if I'm like on a walk and I see, I'm not going to raid somebody's garden and if I don't know who they are or whatever, but if I see that somebody's abandoned it and fruit is falling down and it's just going to get wasted, I'll walk by and pick it up and have a quick little tomato snack, and it's really, really good. There's this really sad day that happens sometime in fall where we have a hard freeze and the tomatoes are gone. All of a sudden, from one day to the next day, tomatoes are completely dead and gone. Now, I've got some options. If I want to continue eating tomatoes, I can go to the store and buy them. How are store tomatoes?
Terrible.
Awful.
Winter.
Might as well eat cardboard. That's an option. That's not a very good option because that's nowhere near the taste of a natural tomato. Or I could do what I end up doing, which is be pissed because I really wanted more of the tomatoes, but that's no longer, that's out. That's not an option.
You could have planned ahead, and you could have picked your green tomatoes and brought them
Could have,
inside,
yeah,
let
great
them
point.
ripe naturally.
Yep.
Or you go and preserve the reds that you have and can them.
It's a great point.
So there are things that could be done.
Yeah. Good. That's a great point.
But we're
One,
lazy.
well, yeah, definitely. We're very lazy.
My grandmother certainly was. Every home up Pumpwan, Brigham City, Perry, Willard, they all had canning equipment.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, yeah, my mom did it. My grandma did it.
Row,
Yep.
you know, and so every year, they all of them were, and there were, I think there were actual competitions about who canned the best stuff.
I also remember that it was like cups of sugar. We thought like the canned and bottled pears and peaches, like, oh, this is a good, healthy treat. And it was like, I remember very, very sweet, but made great pie. Those pies, homemade with like the apples stored in sugar water, amazing. Yeah. Anyway,
See, so what it is our ancestors knew that what they had to do to survive the
Yep.
winter, so they would prepare. And now we just always know that there's going to be food at the
Yeah,
store.
great point.
So we don't have to do anything.
Yep. It's a really great point. Part of what makes humans really unique and special is we can pre-think about those things, and we have learned different techniques to help us keep our food much longer than otherwise. Hello.
Hey.
That's part of what makes us, love your nails. That's part of what makes us human is we've found ways to ferment, soak, sprout, cook is huge. We can cook things. No other animal cooks their food. Other animals eat cooked food if there's a fire, but we can actually harness the power of fire and make food. We store things. Eventually, this wasn't very recent, but eventually refrigeration. We can keep apples for a long time. Like we would go to Santa Quinn and buy the big box of apples in the fall when they were available. And yeah, we could keep them through October, November, and have apples. And if we put them in the fridge, they'd store even a little bit longer. So those are all things that we've learned to be able to keep things. But even in that state with normal natural foods, there would still come a time probably where it's like you did run out of the apples, or you jarred everything you ate jarred is now gone. Now, again, your only options are back to the proteins and fats to give you the energy, because protein is essential. Fat is also essential. You die if you don't have those. So the only place you're going to get proteins and fats when the plants are gone is going to have to come from animals. But again, the carbohydrates really want you to eat them while they're around. Your body loves them and takes them on. So if we're looking at those curves again on the back page, we see what is called the insulin response to different macronutrients. So if we look at the first curve that we see in red, we see carbohydrates. It peaks within 1 to 2 hours. And it takes, what does it say? 90% of the carbohydrates get converted to glucose. That's a little bit confusing. Glucose is the form of carbohydrate that you have in your blood, so your body can convert in whatever carbohydrate into that. Basically, all of that gets into your blood very, very quickly. Now, carbohydrate, glucose in the blood is toxic. It can't stay there. Who remembers how much glucose we have in 5 liters of our blood at any given time? One what? Teaspoon. Yeah, good job. Not tablespoon, teaspoon.
Yeah.
1 teaspoon in 5 liters of blood. If that goes up, what's that? Well, it depends if you go to Nelson. if that number fasted exceeds a teaspoon and a quarter, a teaspoon and a third, essentially, you are diagnosed type 2 diabetes. That's how tightly regulated that is. It's not much. It's tiny, 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 tiny. That's how toxic glucose is in the blood. So you have to get it out of the blood. This is where the hormone insulin steps in and is the hormone that says, okay, sugar, blood, nope, this can't happen. Let's get this stuff out of here. And we stuff it in places wherever we can just to get rid of it. That's what insulin does. And you see that curve is very, very high for carbohydrates. You see that for protein, the peak is somewhere between 4 to 5 hours, so it's much more muted, which is why that curve is a lot flatter. It lasts a lot longer, but it never spikes up even nearly as much as carbohydrates. And then we see the very bottom, fats, peaks between 8 and 9 hours. Only a very small percentage of it is converted to glucose, and your insulin response is next to nothing. It's very, very, very low. So that's how your body responds as far as the insulin response to the different foods. So again, when we're thinking about that, in the state of somebody who is eating naturally, they're eating the carbohydrates that are available then on the land, that is going to be exceedingly rare or very seasonal. You're not going to be able to consume carbohydrates very much. When you do, this is what happens. This is your body's fail-safe mechanism to say, okay, we've got carbohydrates. They entered into the digestive system and then entered in the blood where they're toxic, so now let's get them out and get them stored. Your body cannot store very many calories of glucose. So we have what's circulating in the blood. You store some in the liver, so your liver can mobilize that when you need it, namely when cortisol is high, especially when you need a stress response. Sugar and glucose is fast jet fuel energy that helps you run away from the bear that we talked about earlier. And you can store some carbohydrate in your muscle tissue as well, which is why we say that the muscle is a carbohydrate sink. It's a good place that you can keep the carbohydrates that are in the blood. The more muscle mass you have, the more room you have for those carbohydrates. So it's a good thing to have a decent amount of muscle. If you do, you can tolerate more carbohydrates and store them effectively. When that happens, we get that surge of insulin. Insulin says, let's store this stuff up. We store it in those places that I mentioned. Again, very limited in the blood, some in the liver, some in the muscle tissue. What if those spaces are already full? What if you just ate 5 peaches for lunch, your body took all of that and it filled up the muscle and it filled up the liver storage, and then you come across a strawberry patch and you go, I'm going to have a little dessert after my lunch. I'm going to throw some strawberries down as well. Storage is full. What do you do with the extra sugar? Remember, it can't be in the blood. It has to get out of the blood. Where do you store it? Fat. Yeah, exactly right. Perfect. We have fat cells. We've got lots of them. We've got lots of small fat cells. Let's fill them up. Your fat cells can multiply. They can also get bigger, like a water balloon, essentially. So basically, the cell has receptors for insulin. Insulin, again, is the key that unlocks the door that helps stuff the carbohydrates or the glucose into the cell where it's stored as fat. It's going to sit there as a fat cell for a while. Now, if I'm seasonally, occasionally, rarely invoking the insulin response because I'm rarely finding carbohydrates on the land, there's just not very many available, the spiking of the insulin and the storage of fat is not a problem, because there's going to be a time, again, where snow is flying, everything froze over, I lost my delicious tomatoes, I can't find any more carbohydrates save whatever I stored up and prepared. Now, what am I going to do for food? Well, luckily, my body did store fat. And that's why we have storage of body fat. It's there for a reason. It is energy. It's why we store it. It's so that if you went without food for a day or a week, you don't die. You live, and the reason you live is your body breaks down fat tissue. You might be hungry, but you're not going to die because your body uses the fat that you already stored and mobilizes that and uses it for energy. Okay, so that is how the normal process should work when relating to insulin, carbohydrate intake, um, and our fat storage. So, what is insulin resistance? Has anybody heard that term? Lad, you did a really good job with your analogy, so I'm going to continue to use that. Okay, what if we lived in a world where all of a sudden carbohydrates, plant foods, were no longer seasonal? So we'll start with just apples, for example. What if we invented refrigeration and we invented transportation? And so now I can keep things cold. I can store them for a long time. They don't go bad. I can ship them out all over the planet. And today I live in a world where I can find a Whole Foods in Toronto in March and I can buy apples. I can go to Alaska at Fairbanks and find mangoes and eat those. That food didn't come from Alaska, it didn't come from that time of year, but since we have refrigeration, transportation, chemicals, waxes, all these different things to save foods and ship them everywhere, you can now buy these foods 365 days out of the year. Again, we're just starting with like fruits and vegetables and plant foods, so arguably like healthy things. Berries, you can find berries in South America where those berries don't grow, they get shipped in from somewhere else. It's not part of the climate, whatever. Cool. Well, that's great. Well, now you have a fuel source, carbohydrate, that's available all over the place. If we took that one step further, what if we also developed ways to take wheat seed, the seeds that come in wheat, and we could pulverize it in a way that we mill out everything other than just the flour? What most people understand as flour today is very different than what comes from a wheat seed. There's a germ and an endosperm, and there's protective stuff that comes in a seed. If you can eliminate all of that and just have the white flour that we know of today, you just created another carbohydrate source that is completely shelf stable. Doesn't ever go bad. It's totally fine because you've removed anything in the seed that could go bad, and all you're left with is the white flour. If it's shelf stable, you could eat that 365 days out of the year. You can make bread regardless of whether the seeds are growing when you harvested or not. It's a commodity. Save that, keep that around, and now you can eat bread 365 days out of the year. You can make cookies and crackers. What if you also did the same thing with sugar? So, 500 years ago, sugar was exceedingly rare. Unless you were, somebody who had an immense amount of wealth, especially in Europe, could you afford to buy a tiny amount of sugar, which was delicious, in your tea or your coffee, or maybe you could make some type of dessert with it or something, put it in with alcohol. That's cool, but the supply is so rare that you're just not going to get very much of it. And we know that those people actually, you could see that they started to develop cavities, which is the number one most popular disease in the world is cavities. It is a disease that came from people that consume more of the sugar. Well, eventually we figured out how to make sugar very inexpensively. Entire slave trades were developed around bringing people in to do backbreaking labor to harvest sugar cane and sugar beets in particular, how to refine it down. And now we had sugar that we could give to everybody in much higher quantities. Prices went down, also shelf stable. We can ship it around everywhere. Again, our evolved mechanism is like, sugar's great. We want it because it's so rare. Well, now it's a little bit less rare that we're making. And now it's getting out to everywhere. What if also we started industrializing our food? So now we're not even talking about fruits and vegetables. We're no longer talking about sugar that you can make things at home. You're no longer talking about flour that you can make bread with. Now we're talking about outsourcing all of our food to let food industries make all of our food for us. We just let them decide chemically what is the best tasting salty, fatty, sugary combinations, totally addictive versions of food that we are more than willing to just let them do for us. And we're just going to go to the store and buy it and we can eat that. That's when things get really, really bad as far as that goes, right? We are now living in a world where it's not necessarily that carbohydrates are bad necessarily or sugar is bad necessarily. It's just an availability question. And you are in your genes designed to love this stuff. It's supposed to be amazing. It's supposed to taste fantastic. You might feel crappy after you eat it, but it's always supposed to taste good. If you have a piece of cake, another sweet will taste really good. It's supposed to. That's how we've evolved. However,
And you add advertisement so that you want it,
yep,
even if you're not hungry.
some of these commercials, like in 100 years ago, commercials would talk about a product or smoking or something, and they would say like smoking is good for this and this and this and this, and obviously they were wrong, but they would show you features and benefits. Smoking is really great for these things. In the 1940s and 50s, they realized, like, why are we advertising telling people that this is good for them for certain reasons? Let's do this indirectly and show them all the cool kids that are smoking. Let's show them women who look independent and badass, and they're, being cool with their friends, and they're all like super fit, and they have beach bodies, and they're smoking away. And it's like, you're not selling the benefits of smoking. You're selling this idea that if you smoke, you're going to be the cool kid. And that's how smoking worked. And as soon as we, rightly found out that smoking wasn't great, all the tobacco companies got involved with the food companies and taught them how to run the exact same play. And that's what they do to our commercials. A commercial is a lot less like, hey, this cold cereal has lots of fiber and is super good for you and has vitamins and minerals. It's way more like, you deserve a treat. Or your kids love Tony the Tiger and he's doing all these cool Tony the Tiger things. It's like, wow, that's really enticing for totally different reasons. So advertising is a huge part of that.
Yeah, that's what that Tobacco Wives book is all about, the tobacco industry. And even though they started to find out about the bad things,
Yeah.
they didn't tell, because that's their livelihood, and
Yep.
they didn't want to.
It's a great
which
point.
was sad there for
Yep.
a while.
It's a great point. And luckily, again, our government, stepped in and we said this is bad, so we limited advertising for those things. But now we live in a world where same thing with drug commercials, same thing with food commercials. These drug commercials just have people at the beach and celebrating and Celebritar or whatever medication they say, and then they go on the rant of how many side effects these things have and all these things, the way this medication is going to maybe kill you or not. It's pretty crazy.
And you don't even know what they're advertising.
No, I
what
mean,
the medication
some of
is.
those, I'm like, well, what's that for? Because they're on all the time.
Yep.
These names, and I'm like, well, I don't even know what that's for.
It's for riding a bike in a lovely spring afternoon by the lake with your family, or the erectile dysfunction drugs. It's you and your wife in the bath, and you're loving the evening and the romantic music, and it's like, wait a second, what are they telling you? Exactly right. We're only one of two countries. It's us and New Zealand that are the only two countries that are allowed to even advertise medications.
Really?
When you think about it, it's bizarre that you can, and that's every commercial. And one thing that an interview I did this week pointed out is, if you watch the news in particular, they'll give you bad news, bad news, bad news, bad news, and then follow it up with these commercial breaks that are like, oh, lovely, this is great and awesome, and all these commercials for all this stuff. And it's like, you feel terrible about what's going on in the world, but you feel really great about rewarding yourself with this delicious snack and treat, and you've earned it from all your hard work or whatever. So what happens is this constant stimulation of this pattern. Carbohydrates are consumed. They go from the digestive system to the circular system. I am not learning my lesson about keeping my pen in a place where the wind is moving it off. Idiot. To then have all of the sugar convert to glucose and get into the blood. And when it's in the blood, it's toxic and needs to come out. Insulin is a hormone that says, okay, we got to get this out of here, and we're going to put this into storage, again, in the liver, in the muscles, and if we don't have space for it there, we're going to stuff it into fat cells. What happens when you do that over and over and over and over and over again? Again, Lad's analogy was really, really good, where he said, I've got a swimming pool. The swimming pool is getting full, but I'm continuing to add more and more and more water to the swimming pool. First of all, is that a good idea? Second of all, what's going to happen to the swimming pool?
It's going to overflow or it's going to burst.
It's going to overflow. It's going to burst. Like, this pool it does not want any more water. This is what happens in our cells. Our cells are getting constant stimulation from insulin that says, open up, open up, open up, open up, open up, open up, chronically, all day, every day, for years and years and years and years. These cells get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So what happens is they become resistant. the cell starts to stand up for itself a little bit and say like, whoa, 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 you're trying to give me something that I already have a lot of anyway. I don't want to get bigger. I will burst, literally. Like that can happen to your cells. They can get too big and explode and creates this mess inside the body. But you're signaling to that cell that it needs to stuff more in. Another analogy we'll say is like, say you're going on a trip. Hopefully you choose a piece of luggage that is adequate for whatever length of trip you're going on or whatever number of clothes you're going to be fitting in. So you pack your bag with the appropriate amount of stuff. If you're like me, I take trips like I'm going to Mars. I overpack and just think to myself, like, there's no chance I'm going to go anywhere where there's going to be a store where I could ever buy another shirt. So let me just stuff more shirts in this bag. It's so stupid. I never learned my lesson and just overpack for all of my trips. And I come home with like 4 extra unused shirts that I never used. If I just packed the appropriate amount, it would be easy to put shirts in. And when I needed shirts, I could easily take them out. If I kept stuffing more and more and more and more and more shirts and clothes into these bags, they burst. They don't want any more. This bag is full. Find a new bag or just don't pack as much crap. Take some stuff out of there. Insulin is a signal, again, that opens up the fat cells to store it, but it's also the signal to say that our priority now is to get rid of sugar. It is not to get rid of fat. We're adding to fat. Let's burn the sugar, incinerate the sugar, because you already have a lot of it. It's in the blood. If we can use it as fuel, let's do that. And let's continue stuffing. So now you have 2 problems. Not only are you storing fat, but you're disabling fat to be burned as energy for several hours after you consume the carbohydrates. That's what insulin does. As the cell is becoming more and more resistant, it's got less, if you want to think of it this way, as less ways to accept the sugar. It becomes the receptors that accept that hormone become less and less and less and less. So in that state, you're starting to now accumulate more and more of the sugar in the blood. Now it's starting to build up. So if we look at this, we've drawn this out before, but if we look at this over time, if we have this chart based on time, and unfortunately this takes years and years and years, so it's not something we can easily like measure, something that takes a very long time. Your blood glucose will remain stable for a very, very long time. You can eat this way, you can eat tons of sugary treats and carbohydrates, and go to the doctor in 10 years, and they'll measure your glucose and say it looks totally normal, you're good, no problem. The problem is, since you're becoming more insulin resistant, is that your actual insulin level inside the body is climbing. And as it's climbing, it is doing so because your body needs to release more and more and more and more insulin to have the effect of keeping the blood sugar where it needs to be. Another example of this, your body does this with every hormone, but let's give the example of an alcoholic. I just am dropping stuff everywhere. An alcoholic will take his first drink, we'll just assume age 21. Somebody has their first drink and they get a buzz, and it's this feeling of like, wow, I feel weird in my head and I got this buzz, and it didn't take very much for you to get that. An alcoholic over time, to get that same feeling, will have to consume more and more and more and more to get to that same effect. Same thing happened with drugs. Do cocaine, might take a little bit, you get a great effect, and then you need more and more to more to create the same effect. People say with heroin, like your first hit of heroin is the best one, and after that, you're always, they call it like chasing the dragon. You never get the feeling of what it felt like that first time, because it takes more and more of it to get the same effect. And eventually you take too much of it, and obviously bad things can happen. So this is what's happening over the course of many years, is the body's becoming insulin resistant. Now we're becoming hyperinsulinemic, meaning there's too much insulin. There's so much insulin in the body. Yet the problem is, again, you could measure this at year 20, your insulin might be sky high, huge problem. But we're not looking at insulin, we're looking at glucose. This is what the industry and the doctors do, is they look at this number, they don't look at this number. Part of it is because the glucose was much easier to measure, where insulin is very difficult to measure, and only until recently was more expensive. You can get this measured now all the time, and definitely recommend that people do a fasting insulin test. But But the point that people make is you're going to have diseases related to insulin resistance developing for years and years and years, but you won't see it until the place where you make insulin inside the body, the pancreas, is exhausted. You gave it a job that it was never able to do, pumping out insulin all the time, to where that process kind of breaks. You might even have it kind of decline a little bit. With insulin not rising to control the blood sugar, now we get an elevation in the blood glucose. And this is where we say, gee, we have a problem. And that's could be, again, 20, 30 years. It's many, many years of you having elevated insulin, becoming hyperinsulinemic, to then see the problem be elevated blood glucose. Elevated blood glucose is toxic. It causes damage inside the blood. We know that it can cause high blood pressures. It thickens the arteries. We know that it can cause heart disease and many different mechanisms. We know that it can be bad for circulation, especially in your extremities. It causes all kinds of different problems. And that is all because of the insulin resistance, because we have been putting in too much of the fuel that is spiking insulin all the time, to the point that now you can't make it anymore. Contrast this with another disease that a lot of people know about that requires insulin, type 1 diabetes. Does anybody know anybody who's a type 1 diabetic?
I know. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting problem, definitely related to insulin, but it's almost like the opposite thing that happens. And somebody who has type 1 diabetes, their pancreas cannot make insulin. For whatever reason, it's an autoimmune disease. So if you know a diabetic, chances are, a type 1 diabetic, chances are they are exceedingly thin. These are the people that can eat cake and shakes and whatever junk they can, and they do not gain weight. In fact, they waste away. They just like completely emaciate themselves. 100 years ago, it was fatal. People would just die. Like, you would just waste away. It was terrible. Until we figured out, okay, if the pancreas isn't making insulin, we made insulin to then give to people who need it. Type 1 diabetics need the insulin. Then they can start to store energy, which in itself is really tricky, because what you're doing is saying, okay, type 1 diabetic, good news. I'm going to save your life, but I'm also going to guarantee that you gain weight. All you have to do is stab yourself and inject yourself with insulin so you can gain weight. Think about like a 14-year-old teenager. How enthusiastic would they be about gaining weight with an injection? You already don't like to shoot yourself up, and now you're saying you're also going to gain weight. This can create eating disorders, weird eating disorders in certain people who are like, I don't want to gain fat. I don't like injecting myself anyway. I'm not going to do it. And the body's counter-regulatory hormones, namely in this one, counter to insulin when you don't have insulin, is you have glucagon. Glucagon is an easy way to remember that one. And it runs amok. It's got nothing to keep it in control. So it's just releasing energy. We used to diagnose type 1 diabetes by literally drinking the urine of people. Doctors would do this. And if it was sweet, we knew that you had type 1 diabetes because you were wasting sugar away in the urine. It was going away. We've since refined the way that we do that. So that's the good news.
So
They're still idiots.
But in some cases, they will, yeah.
type 2 is the opposite then, right? You said? Or?
Yep. So type 2 works on a different mechanism where your body is no longer able to keep up with the demand of insulin, and it can't make any more.
Oh, God. Okay.
Type 1, you couldn't make any to begin with. This is now fatal. Let's give you some, and it's fine. Another weird phenomenon happens that if you have a type 1 diabetic and they're eating a standard American diet, they're eating lots of carbohydrates, you have to calculate how much insulin to balance out the carbohydrates. Those people can then, because they're injecting so much insulin to counter the carbohydrates, they can have double diabetes, where not only do they get type 1, but they also get type 2 because they're having a rise in insulin because of all the insulin that they're injecting. It's crazy. And there's this whole subset of people, like there's a site you can go to called Type 1 Grit, where parents of kids who are diagnosed with type 1 diabetes learned, as they discovered to their horror, like their kids are wasting away, melting away. They don't know what to feed them as they get the type 1 diagnosis. And they try to give like the proper exact right amount of insulin to this person by measuring, okay, we gave you this much carbohydrate, we think it's going to spike, it's going to take this long, you ate this much protein, so we're going to give you these many units of fast-acting insulin, and then you're always watching the blood sugar, and the blood sugar is going dangerously low or staying too high, you're miscalculating all the time. It's so frustrating. These parents learn, well, wait a second, why are we giving these kids all of this carbohydrate? If we just stop giving them the carbohydrate, they need less insulin. It's a lower number. They call it the law of lower numbers. Where now, if your blood sugar is doing this, okay, great. Now our insulin dosage is super low and does this as well. Way easier to manage. If your blood sugar is doing this, your insulin dosage are all over the place and you're missing it all the time. So now you're getting kids that are getting hypoglycemic and passing out, and you're getting sugar candies and their blood sugar gets too high. It's a mess. It's a disaster, but you can bypass the whole thing by just saying, let's feed the person differently. Another way I'll say this, I love this example. This was from an interview I did with Gary Taubes. He writes about this in one of his books. And he had a friend who was diagnosed type 1 diabetes. This friend was an engineer, didn't know anything about type 1 diabetes, but was a critical thinker and just was asking his doctor some questions. And so he asked the doctor, he says, wait, doctor, hold on. You're telling me now that carbohydrates are poison to me and that insulin is the antidote. So I'm supposed to take the poison and then take the antidote? What if I just don't eat the poison? And the doctor's like, well, you're just not going to want to live like that. He's like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, it's hard. You have to abstain from carbohydrates and you can take the insulin and that deals with the glucose. And the guy's like, why don't I just not eat if this is poisonous to me now, I'll just not eat the poison and won't need nearly as much of the antidote and I can be fine. And again, the doctor was discouraging it because they're saying, well, it's going to be really hard. Like, you're not going to want to go your whole life without the lovely treats that you named earlier.
Yeah, all of that.
All of that. It's really tough.
What was his name? Gary?
Gary Taubes. Yeah, last name Taubes. He just wrote his recent book is called Rethinking Diabetes. He talks about a lot of this stuff and diabetes in particular. He talks about, he's got several other books. But the point was, his solution to most of this is like, let's cut out the poison for most people so we need less of the antidote. And unfortunately, what we've classically done for this person who is now overproducing glucose and underproducing insulin for what they need is we give them more insulin.
So where does this, and that's probably another talk, but where does this Ozempic come into?
Great question. It's a great question.
Is that
different mechanism?
Blue type, but
yeah.
It has nothing. It's neither one of those, or
great question. Yeah, different medication, different use, different mechanism that it works. So a semaglutide, really popular now with Ozempic, and we'll do a whole lesson about this because people have so many questions about it. But just to say, one of the big things that it does is tricks your brain into thinking that your food is in your stomach longer, and it also works on the level of the stomach to literally keep food in your stomach longer. So it slows down your digestion, and it depends on what dose you're getting. It's different if you have diabetes versus if you get it for weight loss.
That's what I'm wondering, because the people that are trying to are they taking more of it then?
Yes, much higher dosages for weight loss. For diabetes, go ahead.
Oh my God, the woman I fell set for May and June, a friend from high school, she is not fat. Yet she's jumped on this thing.
5-10 pounds to lose or something.
Thinking she is, and I'm just like, I didn't say anything. But she literally rushes home from the airport while she had been in Portugal for 2 weeks or whatever, just to get that friggin' semaglutide injection.
Yep.
Oh yeah, because they can't.
Can't be laid on.
Does it have to be
She
refrigerated or
and
something?
she wanted to know exactly where I put it in the fridge. That's how desperate she was.
It's a lifetime medication, so the second you come off it, you lose the effect. So this is a whatever you want to call it. This is a home run for pharma. This is like we can get people on this. If it helps people lose 5-10 pounds, if some celebrities jump on, this is amazing. And yes, for diabetes, it's a low dose. I talked to doctors to say that this was somewhat helpful. If you can give somebody with diabetes a little dose that just says, hey, you're not that hungry, you'll eat a little bit less. It's a tiny effect. It's not huge, but it can be helpful. When they saw the effects for weight loss, what they do is they ramp up the dose until you can't tolerate the side effects anymore. Then it works less in the brain and more in the gut, where now it is literally slowing down your digestion. You've heard of some of the side effects of Ozempic, which is you lose lean mass. So people talk about, like, for example, Ozempic face. So you're losing muscle mass in your face and you get saggy. Um, People describe what it's like to have food in their stomachs for can be literally days. They feel like they burp and it tastes like roadkill lit on fire because you're like putrefied food in your intestines is that slow to like move through. So there's really awful side effects. We'll see what more side effects happen down the road. Again, I've got an episode coming up very soon with a doctor who worked with all of these medications. We went to all of these statins and how these work and all that stuff. And he's nervous about what's going to happen down the road. And
yeah, because I see, like, especially in her arm, she used to be, but she seemed like to lose. It's like she needs fat or something, because it's like, I don't know if I want to look like that.
It's like deflating almost.
It's
yeah.
Like, because she was in a bait, and I'm like,
yep.
You're skinny, but then I don't know.
Yep.
It's just kind of bug.
And then you read the articles. Yeah, exactly. You read the articles of how these drugs were given, and it's like, who set up the study to prove that this is good? Oh, Novo Nordisk. Who hired the people to do the study? Oh, Novo Nordisk. Who funded the study? Oh, Novo Nordisk funded the study. How did they decide what parameters to look at or how long the study goes? Oh, Novo Nordisk decided all of that. Who peer reviewed the study? Oh, Novo Nordisk and all their people peer reviewed it. So all of that to say, Novo Nordisk says that Novo Nordisk did a really great job with this drug. My thing is, I'm like, okay, well, let's take that and apply it to the Utah Jazz, my beloved favorite basketball team around here. Let's leave the NBA. We'll create our own league where we're the only team. We'll make the basket be as big as a soccer net. We'll play nobody, and we'll win every game by a landslide, and we win the Utah Jazz championship. Celebrate it every year. Awesome. That's great.
Like,
well, parades and all the flags. This is great. We're perennial winners.
Yeah.
Same. That's what they do. And it's like, of course, the company is going to fund everything to say that these are amazing and great. And you look into it and all this stuff is happening. So again, when we go back to the analogy of the alcoholic, what would be a great thing to tell the alcoholic when he comes to you and he says, hey, man, I'm a little bit worried. Like, I'm drinking 12 beers a day and I'm not getting a buzz anymore. Would it be really good advice to say, yo, dude, you should maybe like lay off the sauce a little bit. Maybe we should take some time and not drink as much. That could be a solution. Or you could also say, well, great, I can get you a buzz for sure. Let's just add a bottle of Jack Daniels. You can just drink more. You'll get a buzz. You accomplished what you wanted to do.
Yeah, but they like the taste of beer.
Have more beer.
That's exactly what my cousin did. I went on a road trip with him. He was literally drinking 24 beer.
Oh my goodness.
He had a 24-pack in his front at all times. And those days that I was with him, and he expected me to sit in the passenger seat. And I was like, this is the last time.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Wow.
And maybe to think that he may not have been getting a buzz. He may have been totally fine in that state.
Yeah.
Same with the insulin and glucose.
That's why he ended up in heart surgery like me, or not a congenital.
Yep.
That's what I watched my dad and my brother. They had to, my dad, he would just, and I'm like, he would eventually, but he had to consume, and then my brother. But the weird thing is you have to take a little bit of a time and not, because my brother was sick and he was hospitalized.
You can die, right?
Yeah, because he went into seizure because,
you got to
with alcohol,
step off it.
You can't, so.
That's how we treat it. That's what we do is your body is becoming resistant to it. So we just feed more and more and more. The same thing happens with somebody who is insulin resistant when they think about carbohydrates or smell carbohydrates. A fit person may never understand what it's like for somebody who's insulin resistant when they smell something that smells sweet, for example. Again, the author Gary Tubbs talks about this in a book he wrote, where he says basically, if you're a fit person and you go to the mall with somebody who is insulin resistant, they may smell Cinnabon. You may not have any desire to eat Cinnabon, but for the insulin resistant person, they may already be producing insulin because they associate the smell with carbohydrates that are incoming. Let's get ready for that by producing insulin. And so they're already going to start to have blood sugar crashes just from a smell or just from the talking about something. Like Pavlov's dog, already salivating at the sound of a bell because he knows it's mealtime, the same thing happens. And the fit person may look at the insulin resistant person and say, this is why you're insulin resistant. This is why you're gaining too much weight, because you have no willpower. I can walk by Cinnabon and not eat it, and you can't. What's wrong with you? It has nothing to do with willpower. It's the physiology. It's what is happening in the body.
Yeah, that's what I wonder. It's like, I know some people that won't eat dessert at all, and they don't have a craving.
Yep.
And I do. I would,
I do too. I can't stop.
We talked about that in the one home liquid. Yeah. I can eat one piece of chocolate, one of those Utah truffles that you can get at Costco. I can eat one of those and walk away. I'll eat another one for 3 or 4 days.
Everybody, whatever object you have.
Reese's peanut butter cup, the old-fashioned ones that come 2 at a time. If that comes open, she cannot eat just one. I could eat just one, even a half of one, walk away for several days, have it in the fridge if I want it, come back and eat it.
Again, whatever object you guys have, especially something heavy, please throw it as hard as you can at Lad. I've got a book, I've got a water bottle, throw whatever heavy object you have.
Yeah, but see, that's just it. And so I'm
You
like
suck.
I know.
I wish I was like that.
And so I'm like going, and yeah, and people do get mad at me.
I'm mad at you right now.
And it's like, you guys, it's not that I don't get it. I watch my mom deal with this. And so I get it from the outside, but and I explain to them. I can only sympathize, I cannot empathize. Because I can only observe what's happening. I can't relate to it. And so I've truly gotten away from now, and it's hard because Trish will say, well, I'm gonna cut back on Pepsi. And I'm like, okay. And so then when she starts and I'm like going, what happened to the 7 Pepsis that were in the fridge that would last me a month? And she's like, I said, you said you were going to cut back on Pepsi. And she's like, I said it was going to cut back, not quit.
Yep.
You know? Yep. And I'm like, okay. And then I realized, all right, this is a waste of time. So I was just like, okay, you know, I don't know what, you know.
The last time I gave into this, it was 3 years ago, nearly to the day. It was Pioneer Day.
I know, we're supposed to feel sorry.
People celebrate. I know, right? Yeah. We're all here with our tiny violins. Like, no, you're lucky. You're very fortunate. So again, it's Pioneer Day 2021. People joke it's Pioneer Day and Pioneer Day. I decided to buy a pie. I go to Sprouts. I get their peach pie, reasonably pretty good. I prefer my mom's homemade from those really delicious sugar-soaked apples and peaches that we used to do, but this is a good standard. So I eat my dinner, and then I look at this pie and like, yum. And I take a bite, and I take a bite, and I take a bite, and I eat what's about like a normal slice. I'm like,
did you have ice cream?
Man, this is really good. I should have. Pie goes with ice cream. Yes.
Cream.
No, I didn't on this occasion. That's a great point. I should have. And I eat a little more, and I'm like, okay, I'm good. Like, I'm good with this much pie. That was kind of like more than a slice. So I just, have another bite, and another bite, and another bite. And I look down, I'm like, wow, like that's half of the pie is gone. I'm like, I'm definitely done. So I'll just have another bite, and I'm done with this. I'll just bite, and no more of this. My stomach's starting to hurt, so I'll just have a few more bites. And I ate the entire thing. I could not stop myself. My sleep was terrible. My anxiety came right back, and all night it was like, business is going to fail. Bethany's going to leave me. House is going to burn down. Dogs are going to die. Car's going to, like, all these weird things that are no longer part of my life came back. And I can't stop myself. The last time I got a jar of peanut butter, the jar of peanuts and salt. I don't eat sugar. There's peanuts and salt was gone in 2 days. I can't do it. It's cool that you can. And that's a great thing to know about yourself is whether you're a moderator or whether you're an abstainer.
No, I'm not at the point. I can't be like your function with whoever's saying, I don't want the poison. Because I'm like, I can take the poison in small doses.
Yep.
And so here I am with the skinny fat body, but I've got this, I think I've mentioned to you, this, I get on those, visceral fat too high.
Yep.
No matter what happens.
Yep.
And this muffin top where it's like, look at the rest of me. I'm too thin, not muscular enough, and stuff. And I'm like, all right, that lemonade did that because in 2016 my doctor literally said you got to eat more, you're underweight.
Yep.
So I was like dumping lemonade, anything.
Yep. You'll
Well,
gain,
2 years.
but not much.
Yeah, 2 years, and here I am. Can't get rid of it.
Yep. So it is a blessing in disguise. And ironically, you'll look at somebody who is 400 pounds, 500 pounds, 600 pounds. That fat tissue that's helping them. They could be perfectly metabolically healthy. They can be big. That's just their own body type. That's
Right.
where they're storing the carbohydrate energy that is excessive. But that got it out, and it's protective. You could look at their blood, and their blood might be pristine.
Right.
You look at somebody from, excuse me, Indian culture, from India. They don't get very big. They don't have the ability to add many fat cells, but they get diabetic like crazy. So yeah, that is the blessing and the curse is like lad's body. You will never be 200 pounds
No.
ever. You could do whatever you want to eat, total crap, and you just won't. Your body will fight it.
Right.
Where I could be 200 pounds, but I could never be 400 pounds.
Right.
Some people can, but you'll have all the same kind of things that relate to that. So on that note, if you see like on the back of the worksheet, the last two things we'll cover here, when we're talking about insulin resistance, I want you guys to think of the trunk of the tree and all of these different things, all these different branches that come off of it, which again, I do what I do best, which is overshare things, make them way too small. I'll try to read some of them. Gout, PCOS, obesity, arthritis, dementia, osteoarthritis, inflammation, heart disease, sarcopenia, erectile dysfunction, stroke, high blood pressure, certain cancers, fatty liver, gout, Alzheimer's, inflammation. All of these things are branches of the same tree. They come from the same trunk of the same tree. Ben Bickman talks about this as well in his book, Why We Get Sick. All of these are manifestations of one same problem. So is it the best thing to go to the doctor and say like, wow, I've got PCOS. I'm also dealing with inflammation and I'm dealing with these 2 or 3 other things. And the doctor says, great, take this med for the PCOS. We're going to do this procedure for this other thing. We'll treat the diabetes by giving you the Ozempic. Here's your high blood pressure medication. You're treating all of the branches of the same tree. Why don't you take down the trunk? Get rid of the trunk. And so the next question that I put here is, can insulin resistance and chronic disease be reversed? If you're in a place where you're dealing with one of these branches of the tree, can you get out of it? Can you back away from it?
How much damage has been done.
So
It does get to a point where the branches just fall.
That's true. The damage that you do is damage done. You're right. So anything that's been done, for example, if you've been severely type 2 diabetic and you have neuropathy in your feet, the discoloration, that damage is likely done. If you lost a foot, obviously
Is that
that's
Larry
gone.
Miller? Isn't that what happened to
Yes.
him?
And
Did he
to-
not-
oh yeah,
did
exactly.
he not really care, or
He was too busy.
Yeah, that's
He
just
did
it.
care,
You
but
know.
it's just like everybody else.
Too busy.
He couldn't.
Yeah, or got the bad information, or like for example, like this is another one of those things you should just always ask your doctor when they're telling you about insulin. You need to go on insulin or whatever. Ask them what does insulin do with the glucose? What happens when you take insulin and you get rid of the glucose? You didn't get rid of glucose. You just stuffed it in fat cells. It didn't just magically like disappear into the atmosphere and be gone forever. It's still inside of you. It's just not in the blood. It's around your organs.
Don't piss it off like you were saying that they used to diagnose people by drinking the urine. When we did that, it's just instead of doing this crazy crap, why don't we just piss it out like that?
Because there's no money in it.
Well, yeah. First of all, there's no money in it, but yeah, with your body's mechanism of why you don't just get rid of it,
Yeah.
it can be incredibly damaging to the kidneys as well. So that can kind of help regulate things. It's a problem of way too much energy inside of the body, and the best way to get it out is to burn it off systematically, which you can do again. Once the body shifts away from carbohydrates, if you just abstain, just back away for a little while. Maybe not your whole life. Maybe it's temporary. Maybe it's certain kinds. Maybe you get rid of soda. Maybe you get rid of sugary stuff. Maybe you take a season where you pretend that it's wintertime and you just don't have those foods available. In that state, insulin, we see those curves of insulin. It's going to drop. And when it drops, that is all you need to liberate fat cells. When insulin's low, the body says, oh yeah, great. This is what we were waiting for. We were in this storage mode forever. Now we're in this liberation mode. Let's get rid of this. And you just burn it off and it goes away. So the last kind of picture I put here is a company called Virta. And they've been doing ongoing studies where they've been feeding people carbohydrate restricted diets and people that have type 2 diabetes. I don't have the numbers with me, but they are working miracles. In 1 year, 2 year, 4 year follow-ups, they are taking people who are severely type 2 diabetic, feeding them a limited amount of carbohydrates. It's like greater than 50% of people are off of all medications. 80 to 90% reduce their medications. Most people report they feel way better. They lose weight. They feel much happier. Their brain energy is a lot better. That's an example of a group of people that, yes, whatever damage you did is probably done, but you can become resensitized to insulin, but it requires some abstinence. You can be a cheap date again drinking, but it requires you to reduce your drinking.
Right.
You can be more sensitive to cortisol and not need as much cortisol if you give yourself a vacation and chill out a little bit and try not to stress out about stuff in life. All of our hormones can be resensitized. Insulin is one of them. So if you're dealing with any of these issues, again, the branches of the tree that all come from the same thing, if we think critically about what caused that problem to begin with, what was the root cause, constant, chronic, all day, every day, carbohydrate, 6 times a day, 8 times a day, 12 times a day, Jolly Rancher at the front desk, and a sucker at the doctor's office. And you go home and your blood sugar crashed. And what's that?
Bank.
And you go to the bank and there's
And
a
they give
little
you the
sucker there.
dum-dum.
Nelson,
Yeah,
on the
why
way
not?
home.
Nelson's on the way home. That's where we're all going after this to grab
Sounds good
our
to me.
ice cream. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why also a lot of people who
Yeah, all that
do
stuff you just-
try like a carbohydrate restricted diet do not, they maybe they're eating a lower amount of carbs, but if it's a low amount of carbs, it's like a little nibble here and a little nibble there. And it's like a granola bar, a Kind bar that, yeah, it doesn't have a lot, but you know, whatever. And then I'm just going to have this one piece of candy and that might be fine. But then maybe I'll have this like little bit of a drink with some sugar. It's not that bad, but all of that is accumulating because it's all signaling insulin constantly. If you focus the diet more on the fats and fats and proteins, and you reduce the carbohydrates, the insulin reduces. As it reduces over time, it reduces chronically. The body liberates the fat. It gets rid of it. It gets out of it. Your body already feels fuller longer, which is what those drugs do. You can get that feeling simply by eating foods that make you feel really satiated. If you think about the last time you had a steak, the last time you had an omelet, the last time I had a steak and an omelet was about 18 hours ago. I made a steak. I had it with about a dozen eggs. It was delicious. I am not hungry. I have not eaten anything today. I'm not hungry. Feel fine. I could go on a bike ride or go play hockey or whatever.
Within less than 3 months, when I tried to go that route, and so I never, and I've come from cattle ranches, I never thought I'd get sick of looking at these breads. And I did. And I was like, I can't, it was as repulsive to me as eating too much sugar.
Maybe that's too much for you. That's a good way to think about intuitive eating. So intuitive eating, the way most people talk about it is you just eat intuitively, whatever you go to the grocery store, and if whatever sounds good, you should eat, and your body will deal with it. And like, I understand that. And if I could intuitively eat, I would intuitively eat that peach pie every single day for the rest of my life, because my intuition is telling me that food is delicious and I want more of that.
But if you had it every day, you're not going to
Probably wouldn't want it as much. Yeah, that's a good point. I could intuitively eat a chocolate cake if the pie didn't sound good, or I might intuitively eat all the red vines I consumed as a kid. Those intuitively sound really good to me. But if I change my definition of what is food and I say like, okay, I understand that ultra processed foods, things in boxes and bags and cans, I can put it in my mouth, but it's not really food. What am I left with? Well, now I'm left with whole foods.
Right.
Any kind of protein, fruits and vegetables, grains if you eat that kind of thing, whatever. Maybe your body is saying to you, lad, at that time, red meat, I don't really want any more red meat. Does chicken maybe sound good? Maybe fish sounds good. Maybe something else that's similar.
What's interesting is it is getting more and more to where I can't, even if I switch to those foods away from the starchy carbs and stuff like that.
Yep.
Like last night, Trish tried to get me to eat these chicken tenders, and I ended up trying to eat it, and it was even mediocre to her. But then I was like, okay, what have I got to wash now? So because when I did the genetic thing, it says you can drink chocolate milk. Well, guess what? That's processed too. So you combine these two grossly processed things together, they literally clash. And I had to set the place aside. I said, this last piece of chicken is yours. Chocolate milk tastes like
Yeah, it's
chemical.
gross. Yeah.
And I was like, so I walked away eating maybe a third of what I was planning to eat. And so I'm finding that more and more that I'm like going,
just most recently, I had that grass-fed beef that I bought from Butcher Box.
Cool.
And I threw it on the grill.
There you go.
Okay, but like you said, like we were just talking about, there's a limit to it. But so like I'm like, oh, I am gonna have to really scrounge quickly to find whole foods wherever I go.
Yeah.
But that is not what. Can't stop at Maverick and get whole foods.
No. What you're talking about is like the reality, what we're up against, and what our biology is, right? Like we're in a world where both of those things are correct. Like you can't get whole foods at Maverick, and when you don't eat whole foods, you're going to get very sick.
Right.
And so it's just this impossible kind of reality that we're in. It's like, oh yeah, I only want food at Maverick, and it's really convenient and easy, and it's going to make me sick. What do? That sucks. Sucks for all of us. We're in that terrible, hopeless, whatever state.
Cleverness.
Exactly.
But see, my brother, who he's not an alcoholic anymore. He just like 5 years ago, he says, "I'm stopping."
Cool.
He did. It's amazing. I don't know, but he eats a lot of, and I always thought he's going to keel over because he eats, like you said, red meat and eggs all the time.
Yep.
That's his steak. And I, with our family, and that's what we thought all these years. Yep. But maybe it's not so bad. We're like, because I'm like, I don't know if you should be. And he goes, well, that's what I like. And
could very easy be on the very healthiest diet that we just misidentified, and now we're in this world of like processed food companies made money. The medical system made a bunch of money. The American Heart Association made a bunch of money. Pharma companies made a bunch of money. Might not step down all of a sudden saying, hey, sorry, goofed that up in 1961. Sorry about that. You can eat the steak.
So the weird thing is they said he'd probably get Wernicke's disease. Like you
never heard of that.
I mean, his brain, but it's the weirdest thing. He remembers, out of my siblings and me, he remembers more about our life than any of us. Well, like, let's go ask him, things that happen.
Do you know what they're calling Alzheimer's now?
What?
They call it type 3 diabetes.
Oh, really?
A lot of doctors are starting to call it type 3 diabetes. And that's why Alzheimer's is one of those branches on the tree, and Alzheimer's is one disease under the blanket of dementia.
Yeah.
So what happens in the brain can't use fat as a fuel source. It's too big of a molecule, so the brain has to run on glucose. So if you are having a lot of glucose, the glucose is getting in the blood, and the blood is using, and the brain is using it. The brain can also become insulin resistant. So what if you're trying to stuff a bunch of sugar cells into the brain, and the brain's saying, like, I can't deal with all this sugar? We're having people with brains literally swimming in a wash of sugar that can no longer use the sugar because they become insulin resistant, and now we see dementia and Alzheimer's. We've learned that if people restrict the carbohydrate, your body can make the exact amount of you need, and the brain can also start to use the byproduct of burning fat, which is ketones. And ketones are an anti-inflammatory fuel that ramp up and give your brain and heart energy. It's also the reason why, have you ever heard of heart cancer? Do you ever know of anybody who's ever had heart cancer? It's like 12 people annually or 10 people annually ever have heart cancer. That's weird. All of our other tissues get cancer. Why doesn't the heart? The heart will preferentially steal this fuel, ketones, and use it to the maximum. So the heart can use that steady fuel source that's anti-inflammatory. The heart that uses sugar too much can develop it. So that's like its last priority of an organ that will convert over to using sugar. It likes to use ketones. Same with the brain. There's been lots of stories of people that have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, and they like one famous story, this doctor, Mary Newport, I interviewed her maybe 2 years ago. Her husband was diagnosed with early onset in his 50s, terrible Alzheimer's. You can look up the picture, Mary Newport clock test, and it will give you this picture of this clock that this guy draws. It's one of the ways you can test Alzheimer's is have somebody draw a clock. And it looks like this scattered mess. A 2-year-old could have done a better job of drawing a clock. She started learning about this stuff. She didn't change his diet, but she just started to sneak in coconut oil into his oatmeal. And coconut oil is very ketogenic, means your body takes the fat and converts it into ketones, which is a free fuel that the brain can then use. In the space of, I think she did another clock test at 14 days, another one at like 35 days, where at the end, that looks like a clock. This guy bought himself another 3, 4, 5 quality years of life. He could sing and write again. He could tell jokes again. He could remember things again. They really restored his brain health initially just by giving him free fuel. It's also the reason why cyclists right now in the Tour de France, they all drink bottles and bottles and bottles of ketone supplements. It's really expensive for the teams, but they provide them with it because ketones are just free energy in the body. It's just only just energy that you can use and your brain can use.
If I drink that
It would help with all kinds of energy.
with the muffin top,
Not necessarily, because you're taking in more energy. It will give you more energy. Same with MCT oil. Have you ever heard of MCT oil? MCT oil can't be stored in the body. It has to convert to ketones. So if you consume a bunch of MCT oil, probably you'll poop your pants, but you'll also just get tons more energy. That doesn't mean you're just going to lose a lot of weight, but you will feel really good and you'll have good energy. So in the mornings, I will put a little bit of MCT oil in my coffee, for example, and blend it up.
What's it called?
MCT oil, medium chain triglyceride. MCT. It doesn't store. You can't store it, so it has to be converted into ketones and used. And I notice after I drink it, about 10 or 15 minutes later, I am just not caffeine buzzing, but just alert, awake, ready to go, ready to train my clients at 6. Just feel really good. So again, type 3 diabetes, the problem in the brain. What if we're expecting that your brother, who is eating the least healthy diet, he's eating tons of cholesterol, he doesn't have a problem with his heart, and he's got the best memory out of everybody?
Yeah.
right?
And we just explained why all of that would be the case.
I know.
It's just getting lied to. It sucks.
I know. And I'm like, yeah, it was like weird. And it's like, after all those years and I'm just like, why are you the one that can, and he's always ate like that. He just, but then he throws in pizza every once in a while.
Sure. Sure. But then again, like that response we're talking about, it's the occasional aspect of things. It's the way Lad consumes things. If he can have it occasionally, he's only going to have that occasional bump of insulin. He's not going to have a problem with it. It's the constant that makes it be chronically high all the time. So yeah, it's funny and ironic that somebody could be eating mostly what we think of as unhealthy.
Yeah.
But so anyway, all of that long-winded way to say, like, when you're thinking about the foods that sound good, I always recommend eat whatever food really does sound good to you. Just make sure it's like real food. In the summertime, I don't eat as much red meat, and chicken sounds really good to me. It's lighter or whatever. I crave fish maybe twice a year. When I crave it, like, I really want it, and I'll have a piece, and it'll be good, and then I don't want it again for a long time. All of us are a little bit different. We have different needs, but I think if you are eating real foods, your body will tell you what the best is.
What is her last name? Mary
Newport.
Newport. Oh.
Yep, Mary Newport, Dr. Mary Newport. Her husband, unfortunately, did pass away of Alzheimer's. But like I said, her family was very grateful that they got extra time that they did with him, and quality time, because they were able to restore it until, they ended up taking a turn.
I have an aunt who's had a mother who had Alzheimer's. She died young.
Yep.
My aunt died young. It's like hereditary too,
There's a component of that. There's a certain gene that if you have a double copy of the gene, you have a much greater likelihood of getting it. Yeah. But, and we'll do it, like I said, we'll do a whole lesson on this, but we have a word called epigenetics. So you have genetics, and we say genetics are what loads the gun. Epigenetics is what pulls the trigger. So we have lots of people that have those 2 copies of genes and they don't get Alzheimer's. We have other people that don't have either one that do get Alzheimer's. Your lifestyle can largely determine how your genetics kind of show up. So again, you could have that and have a likelihood of doing that, but at the end of the day, if you had a good lifestyle, you may never deal with the problem.
Right.
So hereditary, yes, but also things you can do.
Yeah. And will you have a discussion about like sugar substitutes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Any of them any good? Or
some are better than others. Yeah. Some are better than others.
Because I get this thing at Beans and Brew, and it's so refreshing. It's called Gold Rush, and it's sugar-free. It has sparkling water. It has these I don't know what those popping pearls. They could be full of sugar for all I know. Anyways, but I didn't realize it was an energy drink.
Oh,
and
gotcha.
The first time I got it, I was like, "Whoa!" Because I don't drink it.
Yeah, that must have felt great.
But it's so good, and it's sugar-free. And I told them to cut the energy, because it made me crazy. But but then I need to see what sugar substitute, you know.
We'll definitely talk about that. There's things like allulose or erythritol or monk fruit, stevia. We'll do a whole thing about that too,
and
because there are good alternates.
I need to bring. We're at a pickleball grand opening, and this guy was selling. It was weird. Most of the time, it's like energy stuff, but this time it was about toothpaste, mouthwash, gum,
Erythritol.
and, yeah, it had a special type of sugar in it. I mean, I don't know if it's. Anyways,
Sounds like erythritol.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. And I don't know, is that good or bad?
Some people are actively promoting that as good.
Yeah.
There's other people that, like, there was a study that came out like last year, the year before, that said it was really bad. The counter to that study is you would have to eat the equivalent of like truckloads of erythritol to get the same effect to show that it's bad. I think all of it is like the dose makes the poison. Is it a little bit that you get in a treat that you have and you can moderate that and have that occasionally? That's probably not going to be a problem. If you're eating tons and tons and tons, that could be a problem.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
The thing
yeah.
that